Soul Magic, Rule 14, What the Chakras Really Are. From a treatise on white magic, also known as The Way of the Disciple, commentary by Dr. Lisa Love. Overview, and this one has some new information. So if you have wanted to skip through it because you've seen the other videos, I recommend you don't this time. And don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell for alerts if you want to be aware of upcoming videos, and always like, comment, share. I do respond to comments directly. We've been told before that there are two goals of soul magic. They are essentially that the soul is transforming the three aspects of the personality, mind, emotions, etheric, physical, into becoming the soul. And that once the personality is soul infused, it can send out those soul infused thought forms that the soul is receiving from the solar angel. But there is a new goal that is happening now, and that is we are shifting into spirit magic. In this video, that goal has not been talked about before, but essentially it is the soul-infused personality has another step. Its new step is to become the solar angel-infused personality. In other words, once the initial stages of soul magic are complete, an additional step begins that we might want to call spirit magic. Here, the soul is no longer an intermediary between the solar angel and the personality. Rather, the solar angel is now able to work with the personality directly so that the mind, emotions, and etheric physical bodies of the personality are in touch with the solar angel and capable of receiving insights directly from the realm the solar angel lives on, which is the intuitional or Buddhic plane. Remember, it influences the plane of the solar angel, the three subplanes of the mental plane where the soul is, but that's not where the solar angel lives. It lives on the intuitional or Buddhic plane. Rule 14, quick overview. Rule 14, the sound swells out. The hour of danger to the soul courageous draweth near. The waters have not hurt the white creator, and naught could drown nor drench him. Danger from fire and flame menaces now, and dimly yet the rising smoke is seen. Let him again, after the cycle of peace, call on the solar angel. The sound swells out. Though no information is given on what the sound is in this rule, it follows Rule 13, where the 4 lower chakras are combined with the 3 higher chakras that are now sounding forth as the 7 that causes the swelling out of the causal body, which is the body of the soul, also known as the egoic lotus. The hour of danger to the soul courageous draweth near. As the 7 chakras are all sounding forth, the causal body of the soul swells to the point where it cracks, so to speak, allowing the solar angel to begin the process of taking hold of the personality directly without the soul as an intermediary. And that's my little animation of the solar angel starting to take hold of the personality there with the third eye coming down and opening. The waters have not hurt the Creator, and naught could drown nor drench him. The waters of the astral plane that were talked about in Rule 10 can no longer hinder the process. Danger from fire and flame menaces now, but the fires of the mental plane cause concern as they blend with the 4 ethers of the etheric body and start to ignite the gaseous levels of the physical plane, activating the chakras. Now the dragon of Kundalini awakens, resulting in a smooth, premature, or possibly chaotic expansion of consciousness. And dimly yet the rising smoke is seen. The smoke is seen as the solar fire of the soul on the mental plane has ignited the etheric and gaseous elements on the physical plane. Let him again, after the cycle of peace, call on the solar angel. The cycle of peace, or the interludes talked about in Rule 13, are utilized to ensure the solar angel can adequately guide the process of infusing the personality with triadal consciousness, what the centers really look like. Centers, first of all, are not pictorial. Before we explain what the descent of the solar angel into the soul-infused personality looks like, let's review what Rule 14 says about the centers or chakras. In most literature on the chakras, we find them illustrated as either star-like, as found in the book of Revelation in the Christian Bible, or petal-like. Rule 14 states that neither of these are accurate descriptions, saying that, quote, the word petal is purely pictorial and a center is formed on this pattern. Treatise on White Magic, page 596. But a center is formed on the pattern. What does that mean? Let's take a look at, then, the pattern of the centers as described in Rule 14. What is the pattern? We are told that, quote, first, a circle, then two circles touching each other, making therefore an 8. Note this is also like an infinity symbol, and this quote comes from Treatise on White Magic, page 596. And we see the 0 and the two circles touching each other here. That's the beginning of the pattern. Circle, then two circles touching each other. Next, Rule 14 says, then as the petals increase in number, it is simply a growth of these double circles superimposed at differing angles, one upon another, until we arrive at the 1,000-petaled lotus in the head. That's pages 596 to 597. So here we have another 8 that we're going to add. And what do we have? Something that looks similar to the Muladhara base of the spine chakra. Let's continue. In other words, we're going to discover that centers are basically superimposed 8s. Rule 14 goes on to say, quote, in our day and in the Anglo-Saxon mode of writing, that means English, this was written 100 years ago, this book, the number 8 is the basic symbol of all the centers, for the petals are really in form like a number of superimposed 8s. So we're used to thinking of it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of going around like this. That's not the way to think about it. The way we want to think about it is we have 8s that keep being added on top of one another. So for example, we start with the circle, remember? And then we have what looks like an 8. And then we have an 8 put on top of that. That was the Muladhara center. And then we have an 8 put on top of that. And now we have the Svadhisthana, or the sacral center. Do you see how this is working? And what Treatise on White Magic is saying about what the petals really look like, or the pattern really is? Keeping this in mind, we're going to come to something that's going to seem revolutionary to you. In other words, the centers are connected to cells. I want you to notice something here. What do we see? A circle. That's when the sperm first hits the egg. What's the first thing that happens? It splits into two connected circles that seem like an 8. Then another, quote, 8 superimposes itself. Then more 8s superimpose themselves, then more, then more. This is actual factual understanding of how humans are created. Are we watching at first the creation of the centers or the chakras? Let's read on. What is interesting about this 8 concept is that when we look at how human beings are created, the very first thing we see are a series of 8s. Again, after the sperm impacts the egg, which is a 0 or a circle, we see the initial 8 emerges, followed by a series of superimposed 8s on top of one another. It's why I still deal with this teaching even though it makes me crazy. Because even though it was written 100 years ago, there's some really amazing things that it says when you really understand what it's saying. Keeping this in mind, Rule 14 also says, quote, the underlying objective in all Laya Yoga work, which could also be called Kriya and Kundalini Yoga, and Kriya Yoga was mentioned in the Light of the Soul book written by Alice Bailey, and Kriya Yoga is a preliminary in the Yoga Sutra training to white magic. So, the underlying objective in all Laya Yoga work is based upon the fact that the energy of the cells, which compose the body or the matter aspect, called in the Secret Doctrine and in a treatise on cosmic fire. Secret Doctrine was written by Blavatsky, treatise on cosmic fire by Bailey. Fire by friction. The energy of the cells which compose the body or the matter aspect is called fire by friction, and it must be blended with the fire of consciousness. This latter, the fire of consciousness, is the energy present in matter, yet different from the fire of matter itself. And whenever you see this in brackets, that's me talking, and I'd like to put an LL after that so you know it's me inserting my understanding. But the fire of matter itself, meaning consciousness is different from matter, and the cells that make up that matter at a subtle, which, back to the quote, which, meaning again consciousness, underlies the entire nervous system, and because it so underlies, it produces sensitivity and awareness. Treatise on White Magic, page 590 here. Let us pause and reflect on what we just read. Essentially, we are being told that the energy of the cells is the same thing her other books, like a treatise on cosmic fire, call fire by friction. Fire by friction is also known as the subtle or etheric matter that is connected to Kundalini energy. And here we are told that another name for fire by friction is the energy of the cells. Let's keep going. Epithelial cells and centers. Continuing to follow through on this idea of centers being connected to the cells, in 2025, 100 years after a treatise in white magic was written, that's when I'm doing this video, we know a great deal more about cells and their energy than we did 100 years ago. To begin with, we're seeing how the initial creation of cells imitates exactly what Rule 14 says. To me, that's amazing. It's describing exactly, without a microscope and all that information, all that high-tech stuff that lets us see it, it's describing exactly what happens as cells multiply at the beginning of life. A circle becomes a double circle or an 8. These 8s or cells multiply and are, in fact, superimposed one on another. Now, these initial cells that we saw in the previous slide at the first stages of life are also known as stem cells. Now, a lot is being made of stem cells now. They did not know the word stem cells back then, but we know that stem cells are so valuable because especially the initial stem cells can replicate any other cell in the body, and that the older we get, the more we lose those stem cells, which is why we age. And as these stem cells continue to evolve, they become what are known as epithelial cells. These epithelial cells are stem cells that assign themselves, so to speak, to create different parts of the human body. They go out throughout the body and arrange especially in groupings throughout the body, and those groupings then cause the various glands and organs connected to them. For those of you that know about the chakras, does this sound familiar? Because most of us know that chakras are likewise associated with the groupings of glands and organs. Epithelial cells have embedded within them sensory nerve endings that allow people to receive outside sensory stimuli. How is it that consciousness comes into the body, that prana comes into the body? It comes into the various centers or possibly regions of epithelial cells that have gathered together in specific areas, actually throughout the body, but there's groupings of them in specific areas associated with glands and the organs associated with those. When working correctly, these epithelial cells help protect you from harmful influences. They absorb helpful influences, and they filter and excrete negative influences on the body when they do get in. As these cells are fed, how are they fed? They're fed by oxygen. What's within oxygen? Prana. From the breath, absorbed throughout the body, and also ideally from healthy foods. What do these cells then do, these epithelial cells? As they receive that information, they decide whether to keep it or reject it, and they also emit energy to vitalize the body. They are what creates the vitality throughout the body. Do you hear what we're getting? They receive information through the prana in the oxygen. They then decide what to keep and what to reject. They upgrade, or if they're sick, they'll downgrade the body. This is science. This is fact. This isn't some made-up stuff. We now can prove all of this. And again, this sounds a lot like how centers or chakras are described as behaving. Here's a little thing. You can pause and read the video that I got just briefly about how cells capture and release energy from the body. So if chakras are basically not pictorial images and are essentially epithelial cells, then why do we have these pictorial representations of petals, gods, goddesses, totem animals, and sounds associated with various chakras? The answer is they all represent the ideal state of consciousness that we arrive at when all the chakras and their associated epithelial cells are operating at their most optimal state. They are ideals we can aim for as we seek to expand our consciousness and upgrade or reprogram our epithelial cells to help us become the ideal human being. And that's at first going to be the soul as we expand our consciousness through solar fire. And then it will be the triad as we expand our consciousness through electric fire, and the solar angel takes hold in the 3 lower worlds. Without an understanding of what this ideal human being looks like, or without the right kinds of spiritual practices to follow, we may expand our consciousness. But as we do so, we could easily go into a state of confusion and chaos, the dangers that Rule 14 talks about, as these upgrades take place. These upgrades, that is the Kundalini openings, can even become disruptive, which is why Rule 14 advises caution about focusing on the centers directly until we have a right understanding of what we are really doing, and why, in a way, it is better just to work with pictorial representations. We can start breathing exercises related to oxygen. What does oxygen do? It affects epithelial cells and stimulates them to accept, assimilate, or reject, get rid of, which, by the way, if you look in the chapter in Treatise on Cosmic Fire about the etheric body, you'll see the 3 functions described there of the etheric body as imitating exactly what epithelial cells do. So we need to be careful with these practices. We need to know what we're doing. But more than that, we need to know what kind of human being we're supposed to be before we even engage in these practices. It is also why Rule 14 says that we have to wait to do these spiritual practices until, quote, the mechanism is ready to deal with it. Those of you that know the Yoga Sutras, that's the yamas, the niyamas, that's getting the emotional and physical etheric bodies ready for this practice. Because, quote, this triple blending, fire by friction, solar fire, and electric fire, can only be safely undertaken by the highly organized and rounded out person, end of quote. I love reading that part. This is why really serious ashrams in India, etc., they'll just tell you to go home if you don't have a well-rounded out life. If you have emotional wounding or triggers or psychological difficulties, go see a psychologist. That would serve you better in your spiritual practice and growth than doing spiritual practices. This is something that Western psychologists have really helped Eastern practitioners of these kinds of spiritual traditions, Kundalini Yoga, Kriya Yoga, understand. You've got to become a well-rounded human being before you do this kind of work. In short, we need to practice moral precepts, become psychologically well-rounded, develop our minds and hearts, and get our physical body and nervous system in good shape. And that is what these pictorial representations point to. They point to certain tasks we need to undertake before we really try to work on the centers or the epithelial cells. The webs around the centers. So if the chakras are really epithelial cells in various regions of the body, and people have made up these pictorial images associated with the chakras, what are we talking about when people claim to see the chakras? Are they just hallucinating or making something up? Rule 14 goes on to say that what people are seeing are really the webs associated with the chakras. Rule 14 states, quote, each center in the spine is separated from the one above it and the one below it by an interlaced protective web, which is composed of a curious blend of etheric and gaseous substance. This has to be burnt away and dissipated before there can be the free play of the fires of the body. A complete network of nadis and centers underlies and is the subtle counterpart of the nervous and endocrine systems. It also goes on to say, quote, these etheric webs are in reality discs rotating or revolving at specific rates, which differ for the differing centers and according to the point in evolution of the system of centers concerned. Only when these webs are burnt away by the ascending and descending fires, that's the Ida Pingala and Sushumna of Kundalini, can the true centers really be seen. Many clairvoyants confuse the centers and their protective counterparts, for the latter have a radiance and light of their own. And the above quotes on this slide are from Treatise on White Magic, pages 591 to 592. Seeing the energy of human beings. So are these webs or discs actually real? Perhaps. In July of 2009, scientists in Japan used extremely sensitive cameras capable of detecting photons and discovered that human bodies emit a glow of ethereal-like light. The color of these lights varies throughout the body, and the light is, quote, 1,000 times less intense than the levels to which our naked eyes are sensitive. If you want to read more, go to Humans Glow Invisible Light, do a Google search for that, the study from Japan. In addition, they discovered that virtually all living creatures emit a very weak light, which is thought to be a byproduct of biochemical reactions. Isn't that interesting? Epithelial cells emit energy. Fire by friction are cells that emit energy. As they emit energy, they stimulate as well and create biochemical reactions with the glands. And this light is not due to the body emitting heat. Is this the light, then, of the energy of the cells who are producing the biochemical reactions that give off a light that some clairvoyants claim to see and interpret as chakras? Fire by friction and the etheric realms. Let's go back to our chart. Remember, the etheric planes are correlated with subtler and subtler forms of matter, and the etheric planes are covered by the phrase fire by friction. Now, this entire physical plane is known as fire by friction. If you're reading Treatise on Cosmic Fire, you will read that the gaseous, liquid, and dense are also covered by that phrase. But up here, matter is getting subtler and subtler. It cannot be picked up by the ordinary 5 physical senses. You can smell gas. If you're in a room for a while, you can smell the gas from a gas stove, etc., or a gas fireplace. Even though you can't see it, you can still pick it up with the 5 senses. But as we get into these realms, you can't. You need extra equipment, which we now have in our modern day age of technology, to see it, hear it, etc., etc. I once had a teacher say, there is no such thing as extrasensory perception. It is extended sensory perception. And you see that too in the charts in the Alice Bailey books as they show what happens as the 5 senses are extended into these higher realms here. Looking at our chart, we notice the first and second ethers are atomic for the first ether and subatomic for the second ether. Note, the word atomic refers to atoms, and subatomic refers to that which exists within an atom, such as electrons, protons, and neutrons. Now, when these books were coming to a conclusion in the 1940s, the atom bomb went off. So we were just starting to discover, as these books were being finished written, they were in 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, we were just starting to learn what was inside an atom. As we come closer to the dotted line right here, we have superetheric and etheric. Superetheric is the third ether, and etheric is the fourth ether, right here, where things become more physical, but can still not be picked up by the ordinary five senses. Rule 14 tells us directly that cells are fired by friction, putting those cells on the etheric levels. And we know that cells cannot be picked up by the ordinary five senses. You can't look at your hand and see all the cells there unless you've got some kind of implant in our modern day era and you've got supervision there that can see into that. Most of us cannot. So could it be that cells, and especially epithelial cells, are really on the third ether? Could it be that the emissions of light they produce when biochemical reactions take place are on the fourth ether, that some clairvoyants claim to see as centers, which Rule 14 says are simply the protective webs? In the next video, we will learn more about this process, especially as we look at what happens when the centers are activated and cause the dragon of Kundalini to awaken. We will also learn about some of the dangers that can happen when Kundalini wakes up and get some tips on how to avoid this. Meaning there's more to come, so don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell for alerts, like, comment, and share, and especially become a patron. It is only because of my few patrons, I only have a handful, that I continue to do this work. They motivate me, they inspire me to keep going. There are many perks, including some of the booklets you see here and charts. I write them emails and special information that I don't share on this Soul to Spirit channel. Become a patron at Soul to Spirit, visit the website, and most of all, thanks for watching. In other words,